Hi, friends. We are nearing the end of our book. We are reading Mrs. Jaffe is Daffy, and we are on chapter number 10, The Uncivil War. Oh, if you're following along, it's on page 89. Well, I know one thing. Social studies does not show that kids learn better if we eat lots of ice cream and cookies and cake and candy. After the experiment in Mrs. Jaffe's office, I had to go home and lie down for the rest of the day. I may never eat junk food again, or at least not for a few days. The next morning was Friday, the best day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday, of course. I was a little late getting to school, and by the time I arrived, everybody was on the playground. I ran over there and found the kids in my class. "What's going on?" I asked Ryan. "Beats me," he replied. That's when two guys in army uniforms marched out of the gym. One of them was the guy Stonewall Jackson, who I'm pretty sure was really our librarian, Mrs. Ruby. The other guy was wearing a blue uniform and a beard, but it obviously looked like Mrs. Jaffe. "You guys and gals gave me an idea the other day," she said. "Studies show the best way to learn is to do the thing you're learning. So I thought the best way to learn about the Civil War was to reenact it right here at elementary school." "What?" we all said. "We're going to have a war on the playground?" one of the fourth graders asked. "You betcha," Mrs. Jaffe said. "I'll be General Grant of the Union Army, and you know General Stonewall Jackson of the Confederate Army. Any questions?" "Are we going to use real guns?" Andrea asked, "because guns are very dangerous." "Of course not," said Mrs. Jaffe. "We will act out the war with our water guns." The teachers came out of the gym and passed out super soakers to everybody. It was so cool. Mrs. Jaffe told everybody in second and third grade to go to one end of the playground and everybody in first and fourth grade to go to the other end of the playground. The kindergartners were given drums to play on the side because they're too little to play with super soakers. Stonewall Jackson led us to our end of the playground. We gathered around her. "Kids," she said, "we, the people, have nothing to fear but fear itself. 7 years ago, the torch was passed to a new generation, and now it's morning in America." I didn't know what she was talking about. "Charge!" Mrs. Jaffe suddenly yelled from across the playground. I looked up. Look at the picture of them running. And Arlo's face, he's like, I don't know what's happening, right? I looked up and saw about 100 kids screaming as they ran towards us with super soakers. I thought I was going to die. "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes," Stonewall Jackson shouted. After that, it was all pretty confusing. Kids were running all over the place, screaming and shooting water everywhere. And some of those fourth graders were big kids. They were drenching our second graders. We were all getting soaked, and kids were falling down and freaking out and calling out for their mothers. "Run for your lives!" shouted Neil, the nude kid. "Retreat, retreat!" hollered Stonewall Jackson, and we all gathered around her again in the back of the playground. "Listen up," she said. "Those Yankees are beating us badly." "Yankees?" I asked. "Why would we fight a baseball team?" Everybody laughed, even though I didn't think I said anything funny. Andrea just rolled her eyes. "I thought this was supposed to be a civil war," she complained. "It doesn't seem very civil to me." "What are we going to do, General Jackson?" asked Michael. "There's only one thing we can do," Stonewall said. "We need to capture Mrs. Jaffe. General Grant." "What?" "It's our only hope," Stonewall said. "I need 2 volunteers." Andrea waved her hand in the air, of course, so that she got picked. I looked at my shoes so Stonewall would not call on me. "Andrea," Stonewall said, "I need you and AJ to go on a very dangerous mission." "What? Why me?" I protested. "Oh," Ryan said, AJ and Andrea are going on a dangerous mission together. They must be in love." "When are you going to get married?" asked Michael. "Shh," Stonewall Jackson said. "I need you two to sneak up through the woods to the back of the playground. come up behind enemy lines and capture Mrs. Jaffe. How are we going to do that? I asked. With this, Stonewall said, pulling out a big cloth sack. Yes, sir, Andrea said, taking the sack and saluting. Good luck, said Stonewall Jackson. We're counting on you two. Don't let us down. Me and Andrea sneaked off to the woods. It was a long walk to the other side of the playground. That's Ellie. I'm scared, Arlo, Andrea said. Hold my hand. Soldiers don't hold hands, I told her. We could get ambushed by the enemy out here, Andrea said. Hold my hand, Arlo. No. Please, Arlo. I'm not holding your hand, and that's final. That's when I spotted Mrs. Jaffe. She was all by herself, leaning against the tree and taking a drink from a water bottle. Look, I whispered to Andrea. There she is. Shh. We sneaked up behind a tree. We were just a few feet away from Mrs. Jaffe. We could hear her breathing. Andrea lifted the sack in the air and pulled it down over Mrs. Jaffe's head. What the? But Mrs. Jaffe didn't even have the chance to finish her sentence because she was inside the sack. I'm going to keep reading. We're now on chapter number 11. Arahahum. Quick, Andrea shouted. Take your legs out, Arlo. We picked up the sack and with Mrs. Jaffe in it and rushed back through the woods. Help, Mrs. Jaffe shouted. Put me down, doggone it. I'm your vice principal. No, I said, you are a prisoner of the war. And in the words of Abraham Lincoln, nanny, nanny, boo-boo on you. Arlo, I don't think that Abraham Lincoln said that ever, said Andrea. Well, he should have. Andrea and I finally made our way back to the other side of the playground. We dumped the sack on the ground in front of Stonewall Jackson. Great work, Stonewall said. Put a gag in her mouth to keep her quiet. I mean, him. Ryan and Michael wrapped a rag around Mrs. Jaffe's neck and tied it to the back. Well, now what do we do, said Neil the nude kid. Tie her hands up with ropes, Stonewall Jackson said. Neil tied up Mrs. Jaffe, and everybody started cheering and yelling as we got word that our side had captured General Grant. We won, kids were shouting. We won the war. We were all yelling and screaming and celebrated when the strangest thing in the history of the world happened. A plane flew overhead. Look at poor Mrs. Jaffe. She looks like a worm. Well, that wasn't the strangest part because planes fly overhead all the time. The strange part was that something was falling out of the plane. What's that? Emily yelled. It's a parachute, yelled Stonewall Jackson. They didn't have parachutes during the Civil War, Andrea said. They didn't have planes either. It didn't matter what they had during the Civil War because the parachute was coming down right over our heads. It's a man, Ryan shouted. It's a man with no hair, Michael shouted. I'm sure you know who it is now, right? It's Mr. Klutz, Neil shouted. Hooray for Mr. Klutz, everybody started shouting. He's back, he's back. Everybody was so happy to see Mr. Klutz again, but there was just one problem. His shoe was heading straight for the swimming pool at the other side of the playground. Splash! It was a real Kodak moment. We saw it live and in person, and everybody ran over to the swimming pool. Help, Mr. Klutz yelled. I can't swim. Glub, glub, glub. Stonewall Jackson jumped into the pool and fished out Mr. Klutz before he drowned. Why didn't you just go to the airport? Ryan asked him. Well, Mr. Klutz said, I saw the school out the window of the plane, and since I learned parachuting at principal camp, I thought that jumping out of the plane would be a lot faster than going to the airport. Look at him landing in the pool. His bald head. Mr. Klutz is nuts. We missed you so much, Andrea said, like a big brown noser. I missed you too, Mr. Klutz said. Where did the swimming pool come from? Oh, rent a swimming pool, I said. You can rent anything there. But why is it on the playground, he asked. I nearly drowned. Well, it was Mrs. Jaffe's idea, Ryan said. She said studies show children learn better underwater. Where is Mrs. Jaffe? Asked Mr. Klutz. Oh, well, she's, tied up, I said. And that's when Mrs. Jaffe came hopping out of the woods. She was still tied up in the sack, and it was hilarious. "What's the meaning of all of this, Mrs. Jaffe?" asked Mr. Klutz. "Arum, said Mrs. Jaffe. Everybody looked shocked, right? Or at least I think that's what she said, because it was very hard to tell because she had a gag in her mouth. "I thought I told you I wanted everything to be nice and calm while I was away," Mr. Klutz said. "It looks like there's a war going on out here." Mrs. Jaffe replied. Well, that was pretty much the end of the Civil War week. Mr. Klutz helped untie Mrs. Jaffe and take the gag out of her mouth. Maybe she'll stop trying to teach us weird ways to learn. Maybe Mr. Klutz will learn how to swim. Maybe Suave Have a Banana will get a job as a phys ed teacher in India. Maybe Miss Small will get her job back. Maybe Mrs. Jaffe will stop saying weird stuff like "you betcha" and "okie dokie." Maybe I'll get to eat more cake and cookies and ice cream and candy. Maybe we'll be able to talk Mr. Klutz into going to the airport like a normal person instead of jumping out of planes, but it won't be easy. That's it. That's the end of this book. I have to take a moment to tell you that this is the last book that I'm reading. I've read for 40, I think 4 or ish days in a row, and YouTube has been giving me some trouble. So I am done with the daily read alouds, at least from my weird school. I also want to tell you that if we were in school together, I would tell you that I know you really can't go there right now, but if you were getting books from the library or you were going to the store or ordering from Amazon, there are tons of My Weird School books that you could read on your own. I have been reading from one section called My Weird School Days, but there's My Weird School, then My Weirder School, and there's tons of books in between. They're all written, as I said from the very beginning, by a man named Dan Gutman. If you have social media, or if your parents, of course, ask their permission first, if you have social media, Mr. Gutman, the author, is a man who lives in New Jersey, and he has been reading every single day on social media from a different set of his books. Still My Weird School, just not the set I've been reading. So you should take a look into that. I will talk to you later, and I will see you on Zoom. Bye, guys!